When the world's most powerful currency starts to crumble, you know something is seriously wrong. If you're watching this, you need to understand what's happening right now in America, because this isn't just another political story. This is about your money, your savings, and the entire global financial system that we've relied on for decades. The US dollar, the backbone of international trade, the currency that nations stockpile as their safety net, is falling. And it's falling fast. We're not talking about minor fluctuations here. We're talking about a currency that has lost 10% of its value in just 1 year. This week alone, the dollar experienced its sharpest single-day drop in recent memory, hitting a 4-year low against major global currencies. And while this financial earthquake is shaking the foundations of American economic power, the President of the United States stood in front of cameras and called it great. Yes, you heard that right. Great, right. This is the reality we're living in, and this is the story you need to hear. Welcome to US Economy Today. I'm bringing you an analysis that cuts through the political noise and gets to the heart of what's really happening in America right now. Because what we're witnessing isn't just about one currency or one policy. We're watching a presidency under unprecedented pressure, facing challenges from every direction, from Wall Street to Main Street, from corporate boardrooms to the streets where families are being torn apart. And the cracks are starting to show. Let me take you back to understand how we got here. When Donald Trump returned to the White House for his second term, his supporters were celebrating. They called him Teflon, a political survivor who had defied every prediction, every scandal, every obstacle. He had beaten the odds not once but twice, returning to power with what his supporters claimed were even bigger numbers than before. For his base, Trump represented strength, resilience, an America that would stand tall on the world stage. He built his entire political identity on one simple promise: a strong America, strong borders, strong economy, strong military, strong dollar. Everything about his campaign screamed strength and dominance. His rhetoric was clear: America would never bow down, never show weakness, never compromise its position as the world's sole superpower. But here's what they don't tell you in campaign rallies. Governing is different from campaigning. Reality has a way of catching up with rhetoric. And 1 year into this second presidency, that reality is hitting hard. The armor that seemed impenetrable is showing cracks. The Teflon coating is wearing thin. And the pressure is building from every single direction imaginable. Let's start with the dollar, because this is where the story gets really serious. The US dollar isn't just another currency. It's the reserve currency of the world. It's what countries use to trade with each other. It's what central banks hold in their vaults as protection against economic storms. It's the foundation of global finance, the benchmark against which all other currencies are measured. When you buy oil anywhere in the world, you pay in dollars. When countries settle international debts, they use dollars. When investors look for safety during times of crisis, they run to dollars. This has been the reality for over 70 years, since the end of World War II, when America emerged as the dominant economic superpower. But something has changed. Over the past year, the dollar has fallen by 10%. 10%. That might not sound catastrophic to the average person, but in the world of international finance, that's an earthquake. And this week, we saw something even more alarming. The dollar recorded its sharpest one-day drop, plummeting to a 4-year low against a basket of major currencies. We're talking about the euro, the Japanese yen, the British pound, the Canadian dollar, the Swedish krona, the Swiss franc. These are America's economic peers, and against all of them, the dollar is getting weaker and weaker. Now here's where it gets interesting. A journalist asked President Trump about this decline. A simple, straightforward question about whether the dollar had fallen too much. And his response? He said it was great, not concerning, not something to monitor carefully. Great. He went on to talk about how China and Japan used to devalue their currencies, how he used to fight with them about it, and somehow concluded that a weaker dollar is actually good for America. Listen, I want you to understand the irony here because it's staggering. This is the same man who ran his entire political campaign on the promise of a strong America. Strong in every aspect: military strength, economic strength, currency strength. And now he's standing there telling the American people and the world that a weaker dollar is great for business. It's classic Trump, trying to spin weakness as strength, trying to reframe a crisis as an opportunity. But here's the problem. Investors aren't buying it. The markets aren't buying it. Financial experts certainly aren't buying it. One analyst called the falling dollar a falling chainsaw, suggesting that trying to catch it or stop it right now would be dangerous and potentially disastrous. Because once a major currency starts falling, once confidence begins to erode, it can create a feedback loop that's incredibly difficult to stop. Think about what this means for ordinary Americans. A weaker dollar means everything you import becomes more expensive. Your electronics, your clothing, your fuel, your food that comes from other countries, all of it costs more. Your purchasing power on the international stage diminishes. If you're planning to travel abroad, your money buys less. If you're a company that imports materials or products, your costs go up, and eventually, those costs get passed on to consumers. But it's not just about consumer prices. A falling dollar signals to the world that confidence in American economic management is declining. It suggests that investors are moving their money elsewhere, seeking safer havens, more stable currencies, better opportunities. And the dollar is just one front in this multi-front crisis. Because while the financial markets are showing signs of distress, there's another storm brewing on American soil: immigration. This was supposed to be Trump's signature issue, the centerpiece of his campaign, the promise that energized his base more than anything else. Secure the borders, deport illegal aliens, make America safe again. His supporters loved it. They chanted about it at rallies. They wore the hats and waved the flags and believed that finally someone would take immigration seriously. But implementation, as always, is more complicated than campaign promises. The Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE, has been conducting aggressive crackdowns across the country. They've been detaining immigrants, separating families, conducting raids in communities and workplaces. The stated goal is removing people who are in the country illegally, particularly those with criminal records. But what's happening on the ground is far messier and far more traumatic than the sanitized version presented in official statements. Let me tell you what happened in Minnesota, because this is where the situation went from controversial to catastrophic. ICE agents, in separate incidents, shot and killed 2 American citizens. 2 American citizens, not immigrants, not people who are in the country illegally. American citizens killed by federal agents during immigration enforcement operations. And it doesn't stop there. Children, including American-born children, were detained in these operations. Families were separated. Communities were terrorized. The images and stories coming out of Minnesota painted a picture of enforcement gone terribly wrong, of an operation that had spiraled out of control. The backlash was immediate and severe. Civil rights organizations erupted in outrage. Lawmakers from both parties started asking hard questions. Protests filled the streets, and most tellingly, some of Trump's biggest supporters in the business community started speaking out publicly. These weren't his usual critics. These were people who had stood beside him, who had supported his presidency, who had celebrated his return to power. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, one of the most powerful companies in the world, sent a memo to his employees. And his words were striking. He said he was heartbroken by the deaths of American citizens at the hands of ICE agents. Heartbroken. That's a strong word for a CEO to use in an official communication. He went further, writing that America is strongest when it lives up to its highest ideals, when everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are or where they're from. This wasn't just a generic corporate statement. This was a direct rebuke of the enforcement tactics being used. And Cook wasn't alone. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, sent a similar message to his team. He said what's happening with ICE is going too far. He made the distinction that we should all be making. There's a difference between deporting violent criminals and what's happening now. The incoming CEO of Target, Michael Fidelki, called the shootings incredibly painful. The CEO of Anthropic, the company behind Claude AI, called the events in Minnesota a horror. A horror. Now I want you to think about this for a moment. These are tech leaders and business executives who were literally standing next to Trump during his inauguration. Some of them were on stage, celebrating his return to power, talking about innovation and American leadership and the future of technology. And now, just 1 year later, they're issuing public statements condemning his policies. That tells you something profound about how badly this situation has deteriorated. Because these aren't progressive activists or opposition politicians. These are business leaders who typically stay far away from political controversies, who understand that alienating either political party can hurt their companies. For them to speak out this publicly, this forcefully, means the situation has become impossible to ignore. It means what's happening has crossed a line that even Trump's supporters cannot accept, and the American people are responding too. A new poll shows that 53% of Americans disapprove of Trump's approach to immigration. 53%. Let that sink in. Immigration was the centerpiece of his campaign. It was the issue he talked about more than any other. It was supposed to be his strength, his winner, the policy that would define his second term. And now, a majority of Americans don't agree with how he's handling it. This is the pressure I'm talking about. This is the stress test, a falling dollar that undermines confidence in American economic management. Immigration enforcement that has turned deadly and drawn condemnation from allies and supporters. Approval ratings on his signature issue that are underwater. Public statements from business leaders who were supposed to be in his corner. This isn't coming from one direction. This is coming from everywhere at once. And Trump's response has been telling. After the Minnesota incidents, after the backlash reached a fever pitch, he gave an interview where he called what happened terrible. Then came an announcement that he would, in his words, de-escalate a little bit in Minnesota. De-escalate a little bit. That's a remarkable admission from a president who built his brand on never backing down, never showing weakness, never compromising. But here he is, forced by circumstances to pump the brakes on the very policies he promised would make America great again. Now, does this mean his presidency is in serious danger? Does this mean he's facing an imminent political collapse? No, not necessarily. There's no serious challenger emerging from within his party. His base, while perhaps less enthusiastic than before, remains largely loyal. The Republican Party still stands behind him, but the pressure is real. And it's immense. And here's what worries me, what should worry all of us. Trump is a politician who built his entire brand on shock and disruption. His instinct when cornered has always been to escalate, to create a bigger crisis to distract from the current one, to double down rather than back down. So the question isn't whether he's under pressure. He clearly is. The question is how long this restraint will last. How long will he tolerate declining approval ratings before he feels the need to do something dramatic to change the narrative? How long will he accept a falling dollar before he starts making radical policy moves that could destabilize things further? How long will he listen to business leaders and political advisors before his frustration boils over and he decides to go back to his base instincts? These are the questions that should keep us all awake at night, because we're not just talking about domestic politics here. We're talking about the global economy. We're talking about the stability of the international financial system. We're talking about immigration policies that affect millions of lives. We're talking about the credibility and reliability of American leadership on the world stage. The decisions made in Washington over the coming months will have consequences that ripple across the entire planet. And here's what you need to understand, what I need you to really grasp. This isn't about whether you support Trump or oppose him. This isn't about Republican versus Democrat. This is about the reality that the United States, for all its problems and contradictions, has been the anchor of the global system for decades. When that anchor starts to drag, when confidence in American leadership wavers, when the dollar weakens and policies become erratic, everyone feels it. Countries that depend on American markets feel it. Workers whose jobs are tied to international trade feel it. Families whose savings are denominated in dollars feel it. So what happens next? That's the critical question. Will Trump continue this path of relative restraint, listening to advisors, moderating his approach, trying to rebuild confidence? Or will he revert to type, creating new controversies, launching new initiatives, trying to dominate the news cycle through sheer force of personality and disruption? History suggests the latter is more likely. Trump has never been comfortable playing defense. He's always preferred offense, always preferred being the aggressor, always preferred controlling the narrative through bold, often shocking moves. But here's the thing about governing in a crisis. Sometimes restraint is strength. Sometimes admitting a mistake and changing course is more powerful than doubling down. Sometimes listening to critics, even ones you don't like, is the smartest move. The question is whether this president, with this personality, in this political moment, is capable of that kind of leadership. Because right now, America needs steady hands. The global economy needs predictable policies. Immigration enforcement needs to be both effective and humane. The dollar needs confidence restored through sound economic management, not spin and rhetoric. And the American people need leadership that acknowledges reality, that adapts to circumstances, that prioritizes their well-being over political posturing. 1 year into this second presidency, the stress test is real. The pressure is building. The cracks are showing. How Trump responds in the coming weeks and months will determine not just the fate of his presidency, but the stability of the global system we all depend on. This is US Economy Today, and I'll be here watching, analyzing, and bringing you the truth about what's really happening. Because in times like these, understanding what's at stake isn't just important, it's essential. Stay informed, stay aware, and stay engaged. The decisions being made right now will shape our world for years to come.